everybody. My name is Patrick from the Chrome extension team. So excited today to bring you another installment of the people behind Chrome extensions. I'm joined here today by David. David, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is David, and I am a product manager on Chrome extensions, and I also handle the developer experience for Chrome Web Store.
Oh, great. What do you mean by product experience at the Chrome Web Store? What all does that entail?
So Chrome extensions is the technology upon which extensions has been built, and Chrome Web Store is split into the discovery front on the user discovery store front.
Like the website itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's also split into the developer experiences, the developer dashboard, and ways where the creators on our platform interact with their users or submit items to the store.
So like where developers upload their items and manage and all that sort of stuff. Gotcha. Cool. Now, speaking of those developers, I reached out on our mailing list earlier this month and said that I was going to be talking to folks behind the Chrome Web Store. And they were kind enough to send in some questions for you. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. A number of those questions that came up on the mailing list, and I was hoping you could answer them for people. First up was a question from a gentleman named Steve Massey. He wanted to know, how do we ensure fairness in search rankings within the Chrome Web Store?
So this is inside of the store when you search.
Correct. Yeah.
For an
so
extension.
when people go to the Chrome Web Store website and search for something, how do you make sure that what's there isn't like particularly favoring one type of extension? How can small developers still succeed and not be overtaken by large ones? Stuff like that.
Right. So for that, I think the ultimate goal that we have for our search is discovery. So is our users finding what they're looking for? And so we oftentimes calibrate. So recently we made some changes to our search, and we're constantly looking at how users use the search. What are they searching for? And are they getting to the types of extensions that they want to actually install? And so we continue to evolve how we get users there. And we don't do manual curation of any kind for search results. So as long as you make an extension that is high quality and is something that the users are actually searching for, you should be surfaced in the search results. And I believe we have an article about best practices for making a good extension.
Oh, great. Then we'll make sure to link that in the description below so people can read more about that.
That sounds great.
If there is there anything that you think developers do that harm their ranking? Is there something that they can do to like improve it, or like is there mistakes that people make that make it harder to rank well?
I think in general, like the mistake I think would be if they are trying to game the system and try to optimize for search rankings. Because oftentimes we do take a look and we see that, users are not getting to exactly where they need to be. So we calibrate it, we optimize, and we change it. So oftentimes the same tactics that might have worked in the past may no longer work going forward, and they might see a sudden drop in their search rankings.
Gotcha. So like that signal that people are sort of gaming to go higher could be used against them, and all of a sudden that becomes a bad signal for our search engine. That could be like, actually, it turns out that if you do these sorts of things in your listings that used to give you a higher ranking.
Well, if it's noticeable, especially if it's noticeable, and then users give feedback, or we see, when we do searches, we see that, why is this one coming up when I'm clearly searching for this term? Why is something only tangentially related coming up in the search results? Then those are signals that we take a look at, for instance, on the team to say, maybe we should better optimize our algorithm for search, or figure out better ways to surface relevant extensions to our users. And so I would think that that's the worst mistake. Ultimately, if you make a quality extension, if you make a quality listing, and you make an extension that users like, it should be surfaced in search.
One other follow-up question about fairness in rankings. I've seen before a couple of times where someone is sort of trying to do that black hat style rankings on a competitor's extension, like trying to raise their own above certain people or something. If you ever notice malicious actions from other extensions, is that something developers have the power to do something about? Can they report that in any way? Or is there a way to say, I noticed people spamming these types of listings or these search terms? Is there something we can do as a platform better for that?
So there are ways to report, for instance, if somebody is like review bombing with like negative reviews. And we also do naturally take a look at this type of activity. A lot of times, like, those efforts are coordinated. And I know previously you had the review and trust safety team on. And we do a lot of things behind the scenes to make sure that we're in general, even without reporting, those efforts don't actually meet the goals of actually bombing the ratings or the ranking of a particular extension. That said, if you do notice that some malicious activity is taking place on your item, you can reach out to us. So there's the mailing list, which we're oftentimes on, but you can also reach out to us through the Chrome Web Store one-stop support form. And so you can report it to us. We frequently take a look at those submissions, and that's actually one of the main ways that we get feedback from the community. Actually,
I think one-stop report is actually fairly accurate. You can do pretty much all forms of support through it. Now, another question that came in from the mailing list was from a gentleman, Ian Williams. He had a question where he's developing a Chromebook app. And he had a question where a lot of times when folks open up their Chromebooks for the first time, they see the Chrome Web Store right away. Is there a way for the Chrome Web Store to prioritize or feature Chromebook-specific applications or Chrome OS apps? Because right now it kind of feels like they're mixing with everything else. Is there something is there something that can be done there for developers? Or is there how can we feature them better?
I think so. I think definitely there's two features that I think of when you're talking about that kind of a request. And so one is like having a set type of filtering system on the Chrome Web Store itself to limit it to like, these are made especially for Chromebooks because they have certain APIs that they use.
Like our AI collections, or we've had different collections on the Chrome Web Store in the past.
That's the second interpretation, right? So like that would be if we have a featured collection of maybe like a handful, like 10 or 20 apps, or sorry, like 10 or 20 experiences, maybe themes or extensions that work well on Chromebooks themselves. But that wouldn't be comprehensive of all of the experiences on Chromebooks. It would just be a collection. And I think that experience, so the collection, is much more likely than having like a filtering system where you can filter by like, these run using Chromebook specific APIs. Because ultimately what we optimize for in the store is discoverability, is our users finding what they're looking for. And users don't say, I'm looking for Chromebook specific APIs to run on my device. They say, I'm trying to accomplish a goal. What is something that gets me closer to accomplishing that goal?
That makes sense.
And so probably we can consider, I don't believe we have one now, but we can consider having a Chromebook specific collection that targets some popular extensions that we see installed on Chromebooks.
Cool. And again, I think the mailing list is probably the best place to voice for support for features like that. Like if the developers feel like there's a gap in the ecosystem. I mean, ultimately, we're really here because developers do wonderful things. So if there's something that developers want, just voicing that opinion to us and the team through the mailing list is a really great way to actually get us to understand what people want, what they're looking for.
Definitely.
Speaking of what folks are wanting for, Hui Kansi had a question that I think a lot of people ask, especially with all the extension migrations that have been going on recently. A lot of folks are doing major substantial rewrites and are a little bit trepidatious with major changes, and they're trying out the percentage rollout system within the Chrome Web Store. If you could explain a bit about how our percentage rollout system is a little bit different, or maybe explain the update system in general in Chrome.
We occasionally do get questions about percentage rollout, and I think we could be clearer about how that all works. That said, there's like a few key points I think for developers to keep in mind. The first one is what is the denominator of this percentage rollout? Right. And so let's say that you're deploying to 10%, you're rolling out to 10% of all of your users. The denominator that we use is active users. So people that are actively using Chrome that have that extension installed. Next is, let's say that you launch to 10%, what people, like what subset of your users get that 10% of the update. And the way that updates work for extensions is that it's kind of a pull model. Like every once in a while, the browser would ask, hey, is there an update to any of these extensions? And if there is, then they pull down the new extension version. And effectively, this ends up being pretty random because you can't control who is like
who's
whose
online, where
browsers,
they're going,
who's
yeah.
online at what time, and like whose browsers are just in that moment asking for
Right.
an update from the system. And so that's effectively how it works.
Mhm.
And then it stops once it gets to roughly the percentage that you want. So like
Right.
roughly 10% of your base. And that's one of the reasons that we limit the percentage rollout feature
Mm.
to only extensions that have greater than, I forget, I think maybe it was
10,000
10,000
users? Yeah.
users. Because anything lower than that, and the numbers are wildly off, like you
Yeah.
specify 10%, and it's like we try our best to get to that number.
Mhm.
And only for the higher your user count is, the more likely it is that we
Yeah.
are to actually getting it to 10%.
Mhm.
So I think in general, that's how that system works.
Mhm.
One tricky thing about percentage rollout
Mhm.
is that if you specify, regardless what percentage you specify, because you've submitted a new version to the store with new metadata, new descriptions, anybody who is a new user, so anybody new who is
Right.
coming to the store for the first time
Mhm.
and installing that extension straight from the store, once you're out at like 10%,
Mhm.
will get that 10% version.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a percentage roll of an update, not of an install, I guess.
right.
Yeah.
And so new users
Mhm.
would always get the new version. So even if you set it at 0%,
Right.
like I think the common misconception
Mhm.
is that 0% of your users, like nobody
Right.
should be getting it.
Right.
And that's not true.
Yeah.
So if you set it to 0%, all new users
Yeah.
would get
Yeah.
that
0% of updates get the
0% of updates, and 100%
Of
of all new
installs, yeah.
users get it. And so if you're actually wanting to wait a while before you release a new version to the public, so assuming that you're trying to control the timing of rollout, for
Mhm.
instance, we actually recommend that you use deferred publishing for this reason. So
Could you give a bit more about what is deferred publishing?
So when you submit an extension for review, you can set it to deferred publishing, which means that right after the review completes, it doesn't immediately publish.
Gotcha.
And so that is the recommended way where we don't release the new version, neither the metadata, so neither the store descriptions, screenshots, any of that, or the extension package itself to any new users. But if you use percentage rollout, all new users get it.
Yeah, immediately. Now, who actually asked, I think they had a pretty good understanding of the current system, but they were wondering, since it's that 10% of users that you mentioned that would get the account, if you release a second update that is still at a percentage up at 10%, you're not targeting that same 10% because of the update system, right? It's a 10% of that 10% might be getting it. And so it might be a weird combination of, you could have people on version 1, 2, and 3 all mixed together. Is there a way that we could update the Chrome Web Store to target the same percentage, that same 10% of users, or to have kind of like a beta testing group that goes out? Is that something that the Chrome Web Store is considering at all?
Yeah, we've heard the request from developers for a beta testing functionality. And this would be the ability to release your update to a subset of your users. And right now, we're actively actually in discussion about how that would work. How would developers manage their audience? So I'm actually curious, especially for developers who are listening to this, like if you have an idea of how you want your beta test experience to work, do you want to manage your own audiences? Is it potentially something that you'd be comfortable with users opting in by pressing a button on, for instance, the Chrome Web Store storefront listing page? Or would you want more granular control? Like I know that you can currently release an extension to a group of test.
Yeah, like a Google group that you have defined.
Yeah, a Google group. And so is it more that would be desirable, or would you like to have less control, but just like anybody who wants to opt in gets to sign up for this, less stable version of your extension?
For sure.
And so I'm very curious actually about.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I think it's really wonderful to hear all the different ways people are using extensions. If they want to test it for their own internal, like they want to dog food their extensions and that's what they want the beta test for, or is it something where you just want your early adopters to come in and grab stuff? So please, folks, if you have opinions, leave them down in the comments below and we'll definitely be reading and replying. Another question that had come up on the Chrome about the Chrome Web Store was how do we determine which categories to pick for things being featured? Like we mentioned before, the AI category or whatever. I think obviously most people know AI is a hot trending thing, and we want to feature that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of different categories that are there. What goes into those categories? Is there a way for folks to request to be featured or request in those categories?
So this would be something like the homepage where you would see a number of different collections. One of them might be, for instance, AI extensions.
Yep.
Other ones might be like ways to write or, write like a pro.
Right.
So our merchandising team handles that. And the way that the selection works is based on a number of different factors. So it might be due to what users search for. So we identify that there's trends of what users are looking for. And so we create collections of potentially interesting experiences for people who are trying to find. As I mentioned, like the goal is discovery, ultimately discovery. And so sometimes we take a look at that. Sometimes we're promoting like new technologies or new ways to use extensions. So for instance, I believe a while ago, we released the side panel API.
Right.
And that not only is an API, which allows extensions to have different functionality, it's a new paradigm for end users to interact with extensions on this, the side panel of Chrome. And so we might have a collection about that. And then finally, I think there's like seasonality. So maybe back to school season, or like for the holidays, people might be home for the holidays. And so we might create a collection based off of that. So there's a number of different considerations we have for creating a collection. Yeah.
Gotcha. And is there something where like a public, like the holiday one's a great example where we might be featuring a whole bunch of things to like make your Thanksgiving great or something. It's like a bunch of random, not generally related extensions, but they make sense in that functionality. Is there a way for developers to get featured in those sorts of things that they can promote themselves to us in some way?
So first and foremost, I think the important part is you need to have the featured badge.
Okay.
And if you don't have the featured badge and you believe you should have the featured badge, you can go through our one-stop support form, which is actually pretty one-stop.
Yeah.
And nominate yourself for the featured badge.
That's the literal like featured word that shows up on descriptions. Gotcha.
Right. And that is the minimum requirement that you must meet for us to kind of to be in the consideration for that. Make sure that your listing includes images like screenshots and you upload all of the necessary like I think you upload all of the like good descriptions, good metadata that we can then use to grant you the badge, and ultimately like that actually helps you be considered.
Make your listing appealing and useful. I think is really the thing that people, if it's something that people want to find, we want to show it off. I think is true.
And this is not like official, but like I think in general we do a pretty good job, or we try to do a pretty good job of highlighting both like new up and coming experiences, as well as popular extensions that a lot of people already rely on. And so we do actively try to help new developers succeed in that way.
And yet again, I'd like to plug the Chromium extensions mailing list. I think just being a part of the community, a lot of our Chromium extensions team at Google are really active participants of it there. And the more folks can be a part of the community, the more likely we are to be aware of and be able to sort of internally advocate for extension developers that we really love and they have high quality products. We're more likely to advocate for them there. So please, by all means, join the community and share your knowledge. So another question that came in was from Artem. He was asking about the Chrome extension update cycle. So you mentioned before that when you send an update, even like the metadata and stuff would be hidden if you have a deferred update, that you had the code changes and the metadata. Those are, I would usually think of those as two separate things. Like, so I was surprised to learn that when I update the code in my extension and it's in review, that period of time where I can't submit another change to the store, I'm not able to like upload new pictures or anything either. They're sort of tied together. Why would the description and like metadata text about an extension be blocked when my code is being reviewed? this wasn't quite clear to me as a developer, and Artem apparently had the same opinion.
It's because from a security and from a policy perspective, they're related. So they're tied together. The description, the metadata, and the item, they're all tied together. Just like we in code check to see if it's malware, or if it's violating, for instance, code obfuscation rules, remotely hosted code rules. We also check the metadata, so the descriptions, the images for policies related to those. So whether you have descriptions that promote illegal content, whether or not you promote like hate speech, like those are policies related to the metadata themselves. And there's also policies that relate to how the code and the description and other metadata are tied together. So is the description accurately reflecting what your extension does, or are you just like lying to everybody about what this extension does, getting them to click on it, and then it does something completely different, right? And so like, because all of those, that review is tied together, and all of the policies are tied together in that way, we review it all at once.
Gotcha.
And so there's really no separating at least the majority of what people want to update, like the images and the descriptions, from the code review itself.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I can understand the frustration. I felt the frustration at first when I sort of submitted the code, and then realized there was like a typo in my description and I just wanted to change it. It's frustrating to not be able to fix that. But at the same time, there's nothing stopping someone from completely changing the entire description of the thing, and it all of a sudden becoming a security hole where I'm claiming something in the description, something completely different in the code. And I can see why that change happens, but it's definitely a frustrating thing, like the review delay that comes through. What's the average review time for extensions? I think most of them are.
We've gotten much better now. So like, I think we have 95% of extensions are reviewed within 3 days, which I think is like pretty good. This is up from 90% back in 2021, like 90% reviewed within 3 days. And so we've been making a lot of improvements to our review time over the course of the past few years. And it's like notably so. Like I still think we have we previously had like an error message or an alert message. I'm not sure if it's still there, but it said like, oh, wait up to 2 or 3 weeks for review. That's because at one point in time, you might have had to wait up to 2 or 3 weeks for review to have completed in the past. And we've basically driven down the incidence of those cases to very few. And so most of it gets done very quickly.
Yeah. No, I think we had a great interview, Oliver and myself, earlier in the year with the trust and safety team, the folks that are kind of behind a lot of the reviews at Google, that folks can learn more about the review cycle. We'll put a link in the description below for that. It is definitely something we're kind of constantly trying to work to improve, both the automated side of that and the procedures for the manual code reviews. It is something that everyone wants to be better. It's that kind of classic issue of like, it's only hurting a lot of times the good developers, like the people, like we're trying to stop the bad people, and we do, but people they only really experience the delays on their legitimate extensions that aren't malicious. They don't see all those things that are being protected. They're being protected from. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. And so like, we think that the review time is like pretty, like we've gotten it down to the extent. So I like noticed that I'm not saying that like, oh, we've gotten it down to 1 day rather than 3 days. Really, previously the metric we're looking at is like how, like the metric we've been talking about is, what percentage are we getting through in what we believe to be a reasonable amount of time. Right. Yeah.
And I think it's something we always want to get as short as possible while maintaining that world-class security level type of thing. Yeah. Ian Williams had another question actually that I thought was interesting. To try to make the reviews as easy as possible, since everything is being reviewed by humans within the Chrome Web Store, is there something where for extensions that have a premium purchase or like a paid section of it, is there something that can provide account information or anything for them to be able to test those extensions? Is that something that we're maybe considering adding to the Chrome Web Store developer experience?
We are considering that. That has become, over the course of the last many years, much more common. And so we are considering figuring out ways to allow developers to basically give us like test credentials or specify to the review team instructions for how to evaluate the extension or how to get access to the features to evaluate the extension. And this is something that we're actively discussing in consideration to put in the product. So this might be coming soon.
Yeah, I think the more folks ask for it on the mailing list or in YouTube comments, the higher priority we give it as a team. Like the louder the community is about a feature, the more likely we are to implement it faster. I know I had the pleasure of meeting with the team that does a lot of the reviews in Bangalore a few months back, and they mentioned that they generally have common accounts for most things. Like they can log in with, like they have like test Facebook accounts, test Gmail accounts, obviously, and all kinds where they can create accounts for a lot of different services. If it's a paid service, it may get rejected on the first pass, but they can developers can appeal it and give them test credentials within that one-stop support ticket, where they can have a two-way communication with them for getting it done today. If there's it's not a complete block, I guess is what I mean. It's something we can work around, but it's definitely improvable situation.
Yeah, that what you're describing is like something that we have, we're trying to always make lives of developers easier.
Right.
And so we have some of those processes in place to address the immediate issue, but long term, we want a better way of solving it. Right. Like if you can just specify upfront, like, hey, I know that you will need login specifically to my service. Yeah. Here is a test one that you can see what my extension does. Yep. Like we do our best to try to incorporate it into the actual product so that it's scalable. Because at this point, it's just like you're talking to us on a one-on-one basis, and like there's really I think there is a lack of confidence from the community that process, we have no guarantees that'll allow them to get, like, for instance, a feature badge.
Right. Now, speaking of developer changes or improvements, one thing that came up quite a bit the last couple of weeks and months has been the trader verification stuff within the Chrome Web Store. If anyone's gone to upload a change to their extension, they may have gotten a pop-up about validating or verifying their account. I have no idea what trader verification is, so I'm hoping you're an EU expert and can explain it to me.
I can only explain it to in a limited sense. Please. I am not a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
And so, but for regulatory reasons, we have a question upon, I guess, coming into the dashboard to declare whether you are a trader or a non-trader under what the EU defines as trader and non-trader. So it's up to each individual developer or company to take a look at what those guidelines are and see if they themselves fall under, like, which category. And so recently, so that's a change that we made, I believe, last year, like the ability to declare whether you are a trader or a non-trader.
We had recently verification of that process. Is that it? Okay.
We recently added verification. So if you declare yourself as a trader, you are typically like a business or an organization. And so we have a verification process where you either enter your DUNS number or you upload certain types of documents to us for verification. And yes, we have heard a lot of feedback since we recently rolled out that verification process and enforced it for all existing developers who have declared themselves as trader. We have heard the feedback. We are listening. We're making improvements. Depending on when this comes out, either we are in the process of making improvements. So right now we're in the process of making improvements, or we've made those improvements, hopefully. And I think the approach there was maybe a little bit different because we had regulatory deadlines to consider. The approach we decided to take is release something we think would work for most people. So instead of figuring out all the small details, planning, and then going up to the deadlines that we have, we decided to release a version of this verification that we think would work for most people. We know that there's a lot of people for whom this verification system fails or is unintuitive. And so we're making those improvements now. And that's kind of the way we're doing this in an iterative fashion to maximize the number of developers we can support by the time that all of these deadlines roll around.
Gotcha.
And so I'm hopeful that we can significantly improve the experience very, very soon, if not already.
As am I.
Yeah.
So another question that came up on the mailing list was, why is it impossible to roll back and start distributing older versions of extensions on the Chrome Web Store? Presumably, the web store has every version that's existed somewhere in Google's cloud. Why can't we ever just go like, oh crap, I need to go back to the last version I was on or 3 versions ago?
Oh, okay. So we do. I was almost going to answer we already support version rollback, and so we earlier this year, we launched the ability to roll back to the previous version. And so I was like, oh yeah, we already support that. We do that right now. But yeah, 3 versions ago. That's an interesting question. It is actually something that we considered while we were designing version rollback. And so this falls into the thematic bucket of nice things people can't have because of security reason, because of all of the bad actors that we're trying to protect our users from. And so we have constant updates to our policies to try to prevent abuse. So occasionally you might have seen emails. You probably do receive these emails on a regular basis, indicating that we have updated various portions of our policy. So that's ever evolving. And the version rollback, the one thing that we wanted to make sure that we're not giving a pathway for, I think, bad actors to take part in is the ability to roll back to a version, because it skips review. There's no review associated when you do a version rollback. To roll back to a version that is no longer compliant with recent policies. So when we had first designed it, the easiest way was to so this is a current restriction. The easiest way was to only support the most recent version because we saw that met most developer needs. So we talked to a few developers. We asked them about what instances would they need to roll back. And for the most part, it is there is a issue, there's a typo in my extension, or I discovered a bug before it even, so when I deployed to 10% of people, I noticed that there was a bug in my extension and I needed to go back immediately because it was breaking user experiences. And so for that case, it was only necessary to support 1 version back for, I think, maximum impact. And even with that 1 version, I believe we have a restriction in place that if the previous version was published 90 days ago, I forget the exact number, I think it's 90 days.
I think you're correct,
or prior, we don't allow rollback.
Because policy changes could have come in.
Because policy changes might have taken place. And so there's various restrictions in place. If we supported multiple versions back, then the logic gets way more complicated. It becomes much less intuitive to communicate to developers. Why do I have 4 versions to choose from? And my friend has 1 version to choose from. And for potentially not a lot of value when we've talked with developers in the past.
Yeah, so it's just ultimately security, is really what the thing is. We need to make sure that users are secure in a way that we know for a fact means the same type of secure everywhere, that policies are being enforced across the platform as evenly as possible. And that's something I think a lot of developers can really that resonates with developers. We all want our users to be safe. The people we're talking to right now are legitimate, good developers making great extensions. And another question that came up from Artem on the mailing list was, for those engaged developers, is there a way to have a sort of a certified or trusted extension, like an enhanced security approval or something like that, to make reviews faster or better for them? Or is there any kind of process like that?
So no, we had discussed this a few years back, and I think it might be worthwhile to bring back the conversation. A few years back, we had amongst the team, we had talked about supporting an audit process, right? So this is the ability to have even a higher level of validation or verification that would then allow this developer to bypass the review or significantly shorten review times. We talked about it. this program likely would be very complex to set up and like very involved and labor intensive, time intensive for both the developer and for us trying to set everything up.
Sure.
And ultimately, when we had a few years back talked to developers about why they wanted it, almost all of them said it was because of the review time.
Right.
It was because we wanted to skip the review entirely and get our extension out to users. And so at that moment in time, we shifted focus. Instead of investing in this program, we were like, why don't we just solve the problem of review?
Yeah.
And so how do we speed up review time? How do we, recently we launched the ability to skip review for if you're using declarative net request and you're only making safe rule changes to your rule set, then you're able to skip review. And so how do we let developers basically not go through review or have expedited review in cases where likely the changes that they're making are safe.
Yeah.
So we decided to focus our efforts in that direction rather than this verification process that is, I think, burdensome on both the developer part and on our part with not too much additional value on top of kind of this speedier review. And so that was why we dismissed it back then. I think now what's interesting is that we have trader verification. So there is a more strict verification process that we've supported in the past. So I'm interested to see if that lets us give, for instance, quicker review or certain privileges to traders that have been verified. But that's not yet a conversation that we have started. So I think like I'd be interested. I mean, so far it's like we just supported the verification, and right now we're fixing a lot of problems that we've gotten feedback about. So, but we definitely should be exploring this direction. Definitely.
So for features like that, where it isn't clear that there's a lot of questions about historically or something, someone has a great idea that can make the platform better. What's the best way to tell you or other PMs for the program they're great ideas? Is there a way for the community to express those? Is it through one-stop support, or is it some other featured communication channel?
So there's a number of different ways. I highly recommend the one-stop support. So like, I know I keep on saying that like we have like a support form you can fill out. And my experience typically with support forms is just like it kind of goes into a black hole. That's not ours. And so ours, we actually, if you have a issue, our response time is actually pretty quick. But for things like feature requests, there's also an option. I forget under which sub listing it was, but there's an option to submit a feature request. We actually don't get that many. And I take a look at them every once in a while. They're right now in a number where I can read each and every one of them. And so like, please submit your idea there. They'll definitely get looked at. And we do consider like how frequently the requests come in and what type of use cases. What would be the most helpful is, in addition to your feature request, talk about or tell us why it's so important to your product and how you plan to use it. So I think like oftentimes we get requests, and as I'm reading these, sometimes it's just like, support this. And that is like,
give me beta channel, and that's the only thing.
And I was like, I don't, I think the response to that is, I hear the feature that you're requesting for. I'm not exactly sure like kind of what you need it for and whether there's another solution to this problem. And so, for instance, the idea of additional verification or like auditing, like for a higher level of trustworthiness, that ultimately is because the developers want to skip review or have expedited review. And so the more information we have about what your business need is, the better we can respond with a product functionality that meets your actual requirements.
Definitely. You know, it's something I think there's a lot of times people underestimate how much value is put on expert opinion. And by expert, I just mean developer opinion on stuff. Like when developers just outreach and be like, hey, I'm having a problem with this thing. It would be great if there was this solution. That's something that humans read. We don't necessarily get a chance to reply, but it's not going into a black box. It's going into something where humans are reading it. And it really does. If we hear multiple people all of a sudden requesting a beta channel and we understand what they mean by beta channel, and all of a sudden when we're doing our planning for the next year, we can be like, man, a lot of people are requesting beta channel. We should really prioritize that. And so it's something that it's great. And giving feedback, on one-stop support, on the mailing list again, is wonderful. And then also if there's like platform level features, I think talking through like the WECG, the Web Extensions Community Group, which is sort of a standards-like body. We're not an official standard, but a group of all all major browsers. There's folks from Mozilla, from Apple, from Chrome, of course, Microsoft, and a bunch of other folks, and then general industry experts all joining together to talk about how to make web extensions better. If people want platform level features like new APIs, that's a great place to bring up requests for that as well. Please.
For new APIs specifically, in addition to kind of the feature request in the one-stop support, we also know that a lot of developers create bugs on Chromium, so Chromium bugs, and those get looked at too.
Yes.
And so that's a great way of suggesting platform features.
Yep. crbug.com if folks want to suggest things there. It is absolutely everything is red. Unfortunately, we can't always reply because there's quite literally
a lot.
Yeah, quite literally millions of bugs that come through. But speaking of, we talked about some requests that come out that are new, that are newer requests or requests we haven't talked about in a long time. There are a handful of requests that I feel like we get asked nearly every day. One that comes to me quite a bit is extensions on mobile. One thing that I think we have come up on the mailing list quite a few times is, are we getting extensions on Android anytime soon? And is that something you can talk about at all?
This is an exciting topic and every time that I've had a conversation with a developer, I've been interested in their opinions, especially for extensions on mobile. I think that the initial perspective that I often heard is that why don't we just support it on mobile? Like, of course, it would be super useful on mobile. Let's have it there. And when we take a look into supporting extensions on mobile in a quality way, like to optimize for a good experience, there's a lot more complications and questions that we have. So fundamentally, the way that people use extensions is very different. The way that people use browsers actually entirely is very different on desktop and on mobile devices. So like on desktop, people spend, or at least I spend, hours of time inside of my browser.
Guilty.
On my laptop all the time. Whereas on a mobile device, it's more app-based. So most people spend a lot of their time in apps. Relatively little time is spent inside of the mobile browser, and not for the same types of activities that they do on desktop. And so with that type of experience, like what do extension developers want to accomplish on mobile? Like what extensions do they want to add? The UI is very different. So it's likely that, the UI input modalities, so no keyboard and mouse guaranteed on mobile devices. And so all of those are different. It's likely that for at least the more involved or the more popular extensions, a specific mobile-only version of it needs to be designed from the ground up and released. And so the question is really, what kinds of experiences do developers want to release on mobile? Is it worth it? And do they think that this is something that will significantly change the way that or improve their business or improve the experience for their users? And that's something that is less clear to us, right? Because like a lot of extension developers we've noticed on mobile are making apps. And so it's unclear if developers would be promoting both their mobile extension and their mobile app at the same time, likely wanting to drive people to one place rather than the other. So what I'm really curious about, and that's what I ask like most developers, if I had the opportunity to do that, is if we were to support extensions on mobile on Android, what kind of experience would you make? What kind of mobile extension would you make, and for what purpose?
Well, fantastic. I think that was all the questions we got from the community for this interview. So thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Was there anything that you would like to ask or suggest that the extension developers up there can do to make our jobs a little easier, to make their lives even better?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So during this conversation, we covered a lot of different things that I'm curious to hear what our developers have to say. So we talked about beta testing,
Mhm.
the future of beta testing. How do you manage your audiences? I would love to learn about how you, as the developer, manage your own audience for this beta testing feature if you want the feature.
Mhm.
I also am curious about mobile extensions, if you would want it, as well as what kind of experience you would want to make for it, and how does it fit into your broader business.
Absolutely.
And so excited to learn about all of that. You can leave it either in the comments below, you can submit it on the one-stop support form, or you can share with us on the mailing list.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone wants to reach out privately, myself, I'm at Patrick Kettner at google.com. Feel free to email me directly with that feedback, especially about mobile extensions. It's something I'm particularly passionate about and would love to see. So again, thank you so much for joining me here today, David. I am thrilled to be able to bring you the questions from the community. And thank you to the community for joining us in the video. Look forward to asking more questions in the future and see y'all soon.